Welcome to Somnia Lore, your place for peaceful, sleepy adventures. Subscribe to our channel, hit the bell icon.
Because our house remembered laughter even when no one was there to make it. It remembered the way footsteps echoed against its walls, and how voices had once filled its rooms like drifting smoke. The house in its silence carried the memory of a night when everything felt both ordinary and impossible. And in that memory, something fragile shifted, something so delicate it could break at the faintest touch. You listening now deserve to know this story, and before it begins, let me tell you something simple, something real. We love you, truly. Your being here matters. You're cared for, even if you sometimes forget it. Before we step into this midnight tale, let me ask you, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Take a moment to notice it. Wherever you are, however the hours have folded around you, this story waits gently for you. Now let's begin. The night of the party came quietly at first. Like any other, curtains swayed in the warm air, the street outside calm under lamplight. But inside, the house felt expectant, as though it already knew what was coming. People drifted in through doors that never seemed to close, their laughter trailing behind them like scarves in the wind. The living room filled with color, with music, with chatter that seemed to multiply and echo until even the furniture felt alive. Yet beneath it all, the house hummed with a different rhythm. Subtle, steady, something almost too soft to notice. There was a boy there, quiet at first, watching. His eyes wandered over the noise, the lights, the shifting crowd. He wasn't yet sure if he belonged in such a place. His hands fidgeted against his sides, his breath caught between excitement and unease. He felt the way some children do when they sense they're standing at the edge of something larger than themselves. The boy, let's call him Morty, though names hardly matter in dreams, had always been this way. Drawn to the strange, unsettled by it, yet unable to look away. And somewhere in the corner, as if the party itself had been summoned just for him, stood an older figure. A man with eyes that flickered like matches, bright and tired, all at once. His smile was crooked, his voice quick and restless, but in his presence was a gravity that pulled everyone nearer. He had a way of making ordinary things seem like accidents of the universe, fragile and temporary. The boy felt it even before the man spoke. Here was someone who would unravel reality and then stitch it together again in ways no one expected. The house filled further, strangers arriving who seemed not bound by the rules of distance or time. A woman with hair that shimmered like rainwater leaned against the stairwell. A tall man with too many bracelets tapped the walls as if listening for secrets inside them. Even those who came unnoticed added to the hum of the night, each presence a thread weaving into the fabric of the party. Yet the boy did not join the dancing. He watched from the edges, his eyes tracing the room as though each gesture, each sound, carried meaning. He noticed how the mentor-like man, Rick, though softened here into something more like a dream teacher than a scientist, kept glancing toward him, checking without asking if he was all right. Their bond was messy, wordless, but real. It was care disguised as impatience, affection wrapped in riddles. As the music swelled, the boy closed his eyes. He thought he could hear something behind the noise, the faint hum of the stars, though no one else seemed to notice. It was like the universe whispering in his ear, a lullaby hidden beneath laughter. And in that whisper was a secret, that the night would not be ordinary, and that reality itself would bend before it ended. The boy felt it in his bones, though he couldn't explain why. He had always carried this strange sensitivity, this quiet, restless awareness. Where others saw only moments passing, he felt their weight, their echoes. He thought of how even in silence, words lingered, how footsteps remained long after people left the room. He wondered if perhaps reality was not as solid as everyone claimed, but more like a dream, fragile, shifting, ready to change at the lightest touch. Someone brushed past him then, pulling him from thought. A girl with quiet eyes. She didn't smile, didn't speak, but her gaze caught his. It was steady, grounding, like a lantern in fog. He didn't know her, and yet he felt seen in a way the noise of the party never allowed. She walked on, vanishing into the blur of bodies, but her presence remained anchored in him. He didn't yet understand it, but he would. The house began to change. Lights flickered, shadows bent in curious shapes. A vase on the mantel seemed to melt slightly, as if remembering it had once been made of sand. No one screamed. No one panicked. The laughter only grew, louder and louder, like a wave crashing against fragile shorelines. The boy watched, heart pounding. realizing that what he had always suspected was true. The world could bend. And here, in this house, it already was. The mentor figure leaned against the wall, sipping from a glass that never seemed to empty. He caught the boy's eye and grinned, as if to say, "See? This is what it means to live. To feel the edges of reality and push against them." But in his grin was something softer, too. Something protective. He didn't want the boy to be swallowed whole. He wanted him to learn how to stand steady in the shifting dream. And so, the night stretched on. The party spilled into hallways, onto staircases out into the backyard where the stars themselves seemed closer than usual. Music turned to echoes, laughter to murmurs, and still the boy listened. Beneath everything, the universe hummed, soft and patient. The boy didn't yet know what it meant, but he felt that he was being asked to remember this hum, to carry it with him. And he stood at a window then, away from the noise, looking out at the street. The lamplight seemed gentler now, the world outside quieter than it should have been. He thought of the girl's gaze, the mentor's crooked grin, the house's hum. He thought of how laughter lingered, even after voices were gone. He pressed his hand against the glass and felt it vibrate faintly, as though the night itself was alive beneath his touch. And in that moment, he understood something without words. The party wasn't just noise or fun. It was a reminder that reality could stretch and shimmer like light across water, and that even in its bending, there was beauty. He realized he didn't have to understand it all at once. It was enough just to listen, enough to be here, enough to let the house remember, and to remember with it. The night would go on, and the world would bend further still. But for now, the boy closed his eyes, letting the hum of the stars fold over him like a blanket, letting the noise soften into something almost like sleep. And the house, patient and knowing, held every sound, every shadow, every fragile secret of that first night, keeping it safe until it was needed again. The hum of the stars lingered in him long after he stepped away from the window. It was soft, like a secret only he could hear, woven beneath the chaos of the party. He didn't speak of it to anyone, not to the girl who had looked at him with quiet steadiness, not to the older man whose grin was both reckless and protective. He simply carried it inside, as though it were a fragile ember he couldn't let the noise extinguish. And yet, that hum had always been with him, even before this night. Since childhood, he had known it. The memory returned now as he leaned against the stairwell, the laughter of strangers rising and falling like tides around him. He saw himself as a small boy lying awake long after others had fallen asleep. While the rest of the world dreamed in silence, he would press his ear against the cool air of his room, certain that the universe whispered faintly above the ceiling. Others heard only stillness, but he heard songs hidden in the quiet, the soft resonance of something far away yet deeply close. It was not always easy to carry such awareness. As a child, he often felt restless when others seemed content. In schoolyards where noise was ordinary and laughter was surface deep, he felt the weight of unseen rhythms pulling at him. He'd stare at the clouds when he should have been listening to lessons, tracing their shifting shapes, wondering if they too hummed their own hidden tunes. His parents sometimes grew frustrated, calling him distracted, daydreaming, but he knew it wasn't just daydreams. It was listening. The world was speaking to him, even when he didn't have words to reply. The older man, the one who now leaned in the corner of the party with eyes bright as sparks, had noticed this before anyone else. Long before the house filled with voices, he had once told the boy, almost casually, "You hear things other people don't. Don't lose that. Most people spend their whole lives deaf." The boy hadn't understood fully then, but the words had stayed. They lived inside him the way the star hum did, both comforting and unnerving. Back in the present, as the party swelled, the boy drifted upstairs. He wasn't avoiding the noise, exactly, but seeking a space where he could let the hum breathe. The hallway above was quieter, filled with shadows and the faint murmur of music from below. He stepped softly, each creak of the floorboards reminding him that houses too had voices. They groaned, they sighed, they remembered. At the end of the hall was a small window overlooking the yard, where unfamiliar guests lounged beneath strings of lights. The boy pressed his hand to the glass again as he had before, and thought of the younger version of himself curled beneath blankets, awake while the world slept, listening for songs in the night. He wondered if that younger self would have believed this moment, this strange gathering that seemed to bend reality's edges. Probably not. As a child, he had never truly believed the world could shift so openly, so visibly. But perhaps he had always sensed it. Perhaps his restless nights, his habit of listening for things others dismissed, had been practiced for moments like this. The girl with quiet eyes appeared again then, stepping into the hallway as though drawn by the same hush that had led him there. She didn't startle him. Her presence felt natural, almost expected, as though silence itself had called her. She leaned against the opposite wall, not speaking at first. The boy glanced at her, then away, unsure what to say. It was easier not to speak sometimes. And yet, after a long pause, she murmured, "It's louder when it's quiet, isn't it?" The boy froze. For a moment he thought she meant the hymn, the same one he carried, but her eyes gave nothing away. He nodded anyway, softly, because whether or not she meant what he thought, her words fit, louder when it's quiet. Yes, that was exactly it. They stayed in silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling. He felt steadier near her, less restless, as though she anchored him without trying. She didn't laugh like the others, didn't chatter endlessly. Her gaze seemed to listen the way he listened, to hold space for things unsaid. He didn't know her name, didn't need to. What mattered was the connection, the invisible thread between them, thin but strong. From downstairs, a burst of laughter rose like sudden thunder. The boy glanced toward the staircase, where shadows moved in unpredictable shapes. He knew he would have to return soon. Back into the noise, back into the bending of reality. But for now, he let himself remain in the hallway, suspended between past and present. He thought of his childhood again, the restless nights, the misunderstoodness, the way even then he had felt like reality's edges were thinner for him. And he realized that this night, this strange party, was not a beginning, but a continuation. The seeds had always been inside him. Tonight they were only sprouting. The older man found him later. Of course, he always did. With his unsteady gait and eyes that saw more than he admitted, he stepped into the hall, glancing between the boy and the girl with a knowing smirk. "Hiding from the noise, huh?" he muttered, though his tone carried no judgment. The boy shrugged, as though to say yes, but also no. The man chuckled and leaned against the doorframe. "Good, means you're listening. Don't stop." And then almost as quickly as he had arrived, he turned back toward the staircase, his voice carrying faintly behind him. "Noise will always be there. The quiet's what matters." The boy felt a warmth in his chest at those words. He knew the man could be reckless, careless even. But here, in these moments, the care was undeniable. It wasn't spoken directly, but it lived in the pauses, in the sideways grins, in the reminders to keep listening. The boy tucked the words away, as carefully as he had tucked away the star Hume. Another ember to carry forward. The night deepened, the party shifted below, voices mingling with music, until they became indistinguishable. The girl eventually slipped away, vanishing back into the flow of people. The boy lingered a while longer, gazing out the window, tracing the outlines of clouds against the night sky. He thought again of his younger self, lying awake, listening, and he realized, now that what he had once thought of as loneliness had really been preparation. The restless nights had not been wasted. They had been teaching him how to hear, how to notice, how to hold on to the fragile hum even when surrounded by noise. When at last he descended the stairs, the room greeted him differently. The laughter still surged, the lights still blurred into stars, but he felt less out of place. He understood now that the hum was not separate from the noise, but within it, beneath it, like a hidden rhythm waiting for him to notice. He walked through the crowd, his shoulders looser, his steps steadier, as though he carried a secret strength invisible to others. And though the house continued to bend, to shimmer at its edges, he no longer felt afraid of it. He was growing into it, slowly, gently, one quiet breath at a time. The party would last much longer, and reality would bend in stranger ways still. But in that moment, with the hum alive inside him, the boy felt ready to meet it. Not with force, not with certainty, but with listening, with patience, with the quiet resilience he had been carrying since childhood. And somewhere above, the stars hummed on, steady and eternal, as if reminding him that he was exactly where he needed to be. The boy moved through the crowd with the hum still steady inside him, a quiet anchor beneath the shifting glow of the night. He noticed now what he had missed before, the patterns hidden in the chaos, the way laughter rose and fell like tides, the rhythm in every voice overlapping with another. It no longer felt like noise pressing against him. It felt like a vast, unsteady orchestra that he alone could hear with clarity. And in the center of it all, leaning against the couch with that restless grin, was the older man. His presence carried the same contradiction it always had. A spark of genius and a shadow of exhaustion, a wildness that could topple walls and yet a care so deep it never spoke its name. He raised his glass slightly when he saw the boy, as though to acknowledge the growth that had already begun. The boy, shy but steadier now, drifted closer. The man's voice cut through the haze like a rough melody. "You ever notice how people treat reality like it's solid?" he said, not waiting for an answer. "They build their lives like it's stone, but stone crumbles. Always does. Reality's more like clay. Soft, messy. Shape it wrong and it falls apart. Shape it right. Maybe you get something worth holding. He spoke quickly, his words tumbling as if they couldn't bear to be caged. And yet beneath the chaos of his tone, there was truth. Truth the boy could feel resonating with the hum inside him. The boy didn't always understand the man's words. They came tangled, dressed in riddles, wrapped in bitterness. But he understood his heart. He understood that every restless explanation was also a gift, a torch passed clumsily, but with intention. The man was teaching him not how to be brilliant or powerful, but how to notice the softness in a world most people ignored. Around them, the party swelled. Someone spilled a drink across the floor and laughed as though it were magic. A group pressed against the wall, swaying to music that had long since become more echo than sound. The boy stood in the midst of it, his mentor's words threading into him. Clay, not stone, fragile, not fixed. It explained the shimmering edges of the night, the bending of the house, the way reality itself seemed to sway under the weight of so many hearts gathered together. The man lowered his glass and leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with something between mischief and weariness. You hear it, don't you? The undercurrent, the thing no one else pays attention to. He didn't phrase it as a question, and the boy didn't need to answer. The man already knew. Instead, he clapped the boy's shoulder, rough but steady, a silent admission of pride. Good. Don't ever let the noise drown it out. That's your gift. Not mine. Yours. The boy felt warmth rise in his chest, unfamiliar but grounding. He realized then that the man was not just a teacher of impossible doors and reckless ideas. He was something deeper, someone who had spent his life bending reality, but who now saw in the boy a different path, a softer strength. The bond between them was not simple, not clean. It was tangled, often messy, sometimes frustrating, but it was real, and that realness was enough. The girl with quiet eyes passed by again, glancing at them briefly before disappearing into the crowd. The boy noticed how the man's gaze followed her for a moment, then flicked back with a smirk. Anchor, he muttered almost to himself. Good, you'll need one. The boy didn't know exactly what he meant, but he carried the word with him like another ember to keep safe. As the night deepened, the house seemed to lean into its strangeness. Lights flickered more erratically, voices stretched in odd rhythms, and the very air felt pliable, as though it had grown tired of pretending to be firm. And yet, amid it all, the boy no longer felt lost, guided by the hum inside him, by the girl's steady gaze, by the man's cryptic wisdom. He began to move as though he belonged in a shifting dream. He wandered into the kitchen where strangers argued cheerfully about nothing that mattered. He slipped past them into the yard where lanterns glowed like tiny moons strung from branches. Every corner of the house and its grounds seemed alive, a tapestry of stories weaving and unweaving themselves. And though he didn't join in all of them, he felt connected to each in some small way, as if the threads of reality had begun to recognize him. When he returned to the living room, the man was waiting. His glass was finally empty, though it hardly seemed to matter. He gestured for the boy to sit beside him, and when he did, the man spoke low, almost gentle. There's a trick to all this. To life, to reality, to everything. Most people fight it. They try to hold too tight, and it slips away. Or they ignore it, and it crumbles without them noticing. But you've got to learn to bend with it, to listen, and then to move with what you hear. The boy nodded slowly. He thought of his restless childhood, of listening for whispers in the silence. He thought of tonight, of the way noise had transformed into rhythm once he stopped resisting it. He realized now what the man meant, to bend without breaking, to be soft enough to endure. The man chuckled, as if reading his thoughts. You'll never be me. Don't try. That's not the point. The point is, you'll be something else. Something the world doesn't expect. And maybe, his voice trailed for a moment, the grin faltering into weariness. Maybe something better. The boy wanted to ask what he meant, but the man rose before he could, clapping him lightly on the shoulder again. Stay awake, he muttered, disappearing back into the tide of people. The boy watched him go, the words echoing like a bell in his chest. Stay awake. He understood then that it wasn't about sleepless nights or restless thoughts. It was about awareness, about refusing to let the hum fade into nothing. The hours stretched. The boy sat quietly, the party swirling around him, and thought of all that had been said. Clay, not stone. Noise hiding rhythm. Anchors in quiet eyes. Stay awake. Each phrase folded into him, becoming part of the ember he carried. And though he didn't know exactly where it would lead, he felt certain it was guiding him somewhere. Somewhere beyond this night, beyond this house, into a life where bending and listening, and staying awake would be more powerful than any loud rebellion. As the music softened and the laughter blurred into murmurs, the boy closed his eyes once more. The hum of the stars was still there, steady and patient. He breathed it in, letting it anchor him, letting it remind him that even in the chaos, he was not lost. And above him, unseen, the universe kept whispering, encouraging, waiting, knowing. The boy kept his eyes closed for a while longer, breathing in the hum that had become his quiet compass. Around him, the laughter rose and fell, never fully dying, always pulsing like the tide. It was strange how the noise no longer frightened him, how it no longer pressed against him like an unwelcome weight. Instead, he had learned to let it wash through him, listening for the softer rhythm that existed beneath. And now, as his eyes opened again, he felt the night begin to change. The party no longer seemed like something contained inside the house. It was spilling outward, stretching into the air itself. The walls shivered faintly, as if tired of holding so many voices. The light bulbs flickered in uneven beats, matching the unpredictable laughter. The boy noticed the air between people shimmering in odd ways, like heat rising off pavement, bending the edges of reality. He had seen hints of this before, but now it grew bolder, undeniable. The house was no longer a backdrop to the night. It had become part of the night's dream, alive in ways no ordinary place could be. Guests wandered through, some familiar, some impossibly strange. A man wearing a suit patterned with moving constellations walked past, his footsteps leaving faint glimmers on the carpet that faded after a few seconds. A woman with hair like smoke drifted toward the kitchen, dissolving slightly at the edges, as if she belonged more to shadow than to flesh. No one seemed alarmed. They laughed, drank, danced, and spoke as though nothing were unusual, as though the bending of reality was just another part of the celebration. The boy, though, felt both wonder and unease. It was beautiful, this fluid dream where everything shimmered and shifted, but it also carried weight, like glass stretched thin. He pressed his fingers against the wall and felt it thrum beneath his touch. Not solid, not steady, but alive and restless. He wondered how much more the house could hold before it broke. The older man appeared again, weaving through the crowd with a grin that almost disguised his sharp attention. He moved as though none of this surprised him, as though the bending of walls and shimmering air were simply the natural result of living too fully. He leaned close to the boy, his voice nearly lost beneath the music. "See what I mean? Clay, not stone. And look how they mold it without even noticing." He gestured toward the guests, who were too busy laughing to realize the world around them was bending to their joy. The boy nodded, but his brow furrowed. He whispered back, "What happens if it breaks?" The man's grin flickered, just for a moment before returning. "Then it breaks. That's the risk. But don't waste time worrying about collapse. Worry about what you make before it does." His words carried both freedom and warning, and the boy tucked them into his chest alongside all the others. The girl with quiet eyes passed nearby, her steps slower than the rest. She glanced at the boy, and for a heartbeat, he thought she could see the weight of his worry. She didn't smile, but the steadiness in her gaze offered calm, like a reminder that even if reality bent, he could remain grounded. She vanished again into the blur, but her presence lingered. The party surged louder then, almost fevered. Someone turned the music higher, though the sound no longer felt like ordinary music. It stretched and looped, carrying notes that shouldn't have existed, tones that echoed as though they belonged to a deeper world. Lights flickered until they blurred into floating orbs, drifting lazily above people's heads. The boy reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing against one of them. It pulsed warmly, then dissolved into sparks that vanished into his skin. He gasped softly, but no one else seemed to notice. For the first time that night, he felt reality push back. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't entirely safe either. It reminded him of the way rivers swelled after heavy rains. Beautiful, powerful, but dangerous if one stepped carelessly. He realized then that the laughter of the guests, the endless dancing, the wild joy, was not harmless. It was reshaping the house, reshaping the night, reshaping reality itself. The older man laughed suddenly, clapping someone on the back, his words slurring but his eyes sharp. The boy watched him closely, realizing how much the man seemed both part of the chaos and apart from it. He thrived in bending realities, yet beneath his grin was something protective, a constant watchfulness. The boy wondered if that was why he had been brought here to witness, to learn, to discover his own place in this fragile dream. He stepped into the backyard where the lanterns hung low, glowing brighter than before. The night sky above seemed closer now, the stars pulsing as though they had been drawn down by the noise inside the house. He tilted his head back, hearing the hum again, stronger than ever. It mixed with the laughter, with the strange music, with the shimmer of lights. until it all felt like one vast, unsteady song. Guests sprawled on the grass, their voices drifting upward into the night. Some spoke in languages he didn't recognize. Some whispered secrets into the air, as though the stars themselves might carry them. The boy sat among them, silent, listening. He felt as though the world itself was teetering between dream and waking, held together only by the delicate threads of their presence. The girl found him again there, settling quietly beside him. She didn't speak, didn't ask what he was hearing. She simply sat, her shoulder brushing his lightly, her silence steady and grounding. For a moment, the boy forgot his worry. He closed his eyes and let the hum surround him, comforted by her quiet companionship. But even in that calm, he knew the night was stretching further than it should. The laughter was too loud, the lights too bright, the air too thin. The house trembled faintly and the stars seemed restless. Something would have to give. He could feel it in his bones, as surely as he had felt the hum as a child. The party could not go on forever without consequence. And yet, he didn't fear it, not fully. He had begun to understand the lesson of clay and stone, of bending instead of breaking. Whatever came, he would face it with listening, with patience, with the quiet resilience he carried. The girl's presence beside him reminded him that he was not alone, and the older man's words echoed still. Worry not about collapse, but about what you make before it comes. So the boy sat beneath the lanterns, the hum weaving through him, the laughter swirling like tides, the stars leaning closer. The night was fragile, beautiful, and trembling at its edges, and he was ready to listen for what came next. The boy did not move from where he sat beneath the lanterns. The grass was cool against his palms, grounding him as the hum threaded steadily through his chest. The girl beside him remained quiet, her gaze tilted toward the stars that seemed to hang lower than they had before, as though drawn closer by the night's restless pulse. For a long moment, nothing changed, only the soft rise and fall of laughter spilling from the house, the thrum of music twisting in impossible ways, and the fragile stillness between his breaths. But then, almost imperceptibly, the air thickened. It was subtle at first, like the moment before a storm when the sky holds its breath. The boy felt it press lightly against his skin, not oppressive but insistent, as if reminding him that the night was nearing a threshold. The lanterns flickered once, twice, then steadied, their glow softer now, more intimate. The guests sprawled across the grass didn't seem to notice, their voices weaving into a tapestry of half-remembered songs and strange unspoken promises. Yet the boy could sense it, the shift, the way the night leaned closer, demanding attention. The older man emerged from the house again, his presence cutting through the haze like a blade. He carried with him the residue of laughter and noise, but beneath his grin was an intensity that could not be disguised. His eyes found the boy quickly, as though he had known all along where he would be. With a casualness that didn't fool anyone, he sank into the grass across from them, leaning back on his elbows as though resting, though his gaze never stopped its restless flicker across the yard. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his tone light but threaded with something heavier. The boy hesitated, then nodded. "It's thicker now," the boy whispered, "like the air wants something." The man's grin widened slightly, though not with joy. "Good. You're listening properly. Most people never hear it until it's too late." He glanced at the girl, who had not moved, her steady eyes reflecting lanterns. She said nothing, but the weight of her silence spoke more than words could. The boy leaned forward. What happens when it reaches whatever it's leaning toward? The man chuckled, low and rough. "That depends on whether you guide it or let it consume itself. Nights like these are alive. They feed on what people pour into them. Laughter, music, secrets, fears, too much. And the night swells until it can't hold itself together. But if someone listens, if someone learns to shape it, then the night bends instead of breaks." The boy absorbed the words, though unease pricked at his chest. He looked toward the house, where shadows moved against walls that no longer felt like stone but fluid, shifting with each burst of sound. The guests had grown louder, their joy teetering on frenzy. He wondered if they realized how fragile it all had become, or if they would laugh blindly until everything collapsed. The girl shifted then, the faintest movement, her shoulder brushing his. "It doesn't have to break," she said softly, her voice steady as the stars above. It was the first time she had spoken since sitting beside him, and her words landed with quiet certainty. The boy turned to her, startled by both her tone and the calm that radiated from it. The older man tilted his head, studying her. For once, his grin faltered into something unreadable, as though her presence unsettled even him. But he said nothing, only leaned back again and closed his eyes, as if testing whether he could trust the silence she carried. The night pressed heavier, the music inside warped further, its rhythm spilling into the yard in strange, uneven waves. Some of the guests stirred uneasily, glancing around as though sensing the tension beneath their joy. The boy's heartbeat matched the hum, steady but growing louder in his ears. He knew the moment was near, though he didn't know what form it would take. One of the lanterns overhead flickered violently, then burst without sound, scattering into fragments of light that dissolved before touching the ground. The boy flinched, but no one screamed. Instead, the guests laughed, pointing at the sparks, as though it were part of the entertainment. The boy, however, understood. It wasn't just a lantern that had broken. It was the first crack in the night's fragile fabric. He rose slowly, his legs trembling but steady enough to hold him. The girl followed, standing beside him without hesitation. The older man opened one eye, watching, and for a moment something like pride flickered across his face. "What are you gonna do?" the man asked. The boy didn't answer immediately. He didn't know the full shape of what was required, only that the night demanded balance, and that he had been listening long enough to sense its rhythm. He closed his eyes, letting the hum swell within him, letting it guide his breathing. The laughter, the music, the trembling stars, they all wove together into one vast, unsteady song. He let it pass through him, not fighting, not fearing, only listening. The ground beneath him vibrated faintly, as though acknowledging his attention. The walls of the house shivered but steadied, no longer pulling outward with such violence. The boy opened his eyes again, finding the guests still lost in their revelry, unaware of how close they stood to collapse. The girl's gaze was on him, steady, anchoring him in the moment. The older man's grin had returned, but it was softer now, tinged with something almost reverent. The boy exhaled, a slow release, and the night seemed to breathe with him. The tension eased, though not fully. The air was still thick, the danger still present, but balance had been restored enough for the moment. The lanterns above swayed gently, their light no longer bursting, but glowing with fragile steadiness. The older man finally spoke again, his voice quieter, almost serious. "You've done more than most ever learned to do. But remember, this was only one night. There will be others. Nights that bend. Nights that demand. Nights that test whether you can hold them without breaking yourself." The boy nodded, though his chest still thrummed with the hum, heavy and restless. He didn't know if he could do it again, didn't know if he even understood what he had done just now. But he knew he had listened, and for now, that was enough. The girl touched his arm lightly, a brief reassurance before stepping back into the shadows. Her presence lingered, though, steady as always. The boy realized then that she too was part of this rhythm, part of the fragile balance that held the night together. The guests began to drift, their energy softening, their laughter no longer frantic but fading into murmurs. Some slipped inside, others lay back against the grass, staring dreamily at the stars. The party hadn't ended, but it had shifted, gentler now, as though the night itself had sighed in relief. The boy sank back into the grass, exhausted but calm. The older man remained nearby, watching him with a look that was neither mocking nor playful, but something heavier, like recognition. The hum still pulsed within, quieter now, but alive, reminding him that this was not an end, only a beginning. Above, the stars shimmered closer than they had ever been, and the boy knew that the night still had secrets to unfold. He closed his eyes once more, letting the rhythm carry him, ready to listen for whatever came next. The boy lay back on the grass, his chest rising and falling slowly as if he were trying to match his breath with the rhythm of the night. The hum inside him had quieted, but it had not vanished. It lingered like the echo of a song that had once been loud, reminding him with each pulse that he had touched something greater than himself. He could still feel the way the lantern steadied when he listened, the way the walls of the house bent back into place when he gave his silence to the night. It was strange. He had not moved mountains, had not spoken a single command, and yet something had shifted simply because he had opened himself to it. The girl remained nearby, her quiet gaze on the stars. She did not speak, but her stillness was a presence of its own, grounding him as much as the earth beneath his palms. The older man had wandered closer to the shadows of the house, his figure half absorbed by the dim glow spilling from within. From time to time, the boy caught the faint gleam of his eyes, watching, measuring as though the night were a lesson and he the reluctant student who had passed his first test. Slowly, the noise of the party softened. The laughter of the guests had lost its jagged edges, rolling now in gentle waves instead of piercing shouts. Even the music seemed to have surrendered, its sharp rhythm unraveling into a dreamy murmur. The world felt fragile still, but not threatening, like glass cradled in careful hands. The boy wondered how long it would last, how long the night would allow them to float in this delicate balance. It was then that he noticed the lights. At first he thought they were more lanterns drifting higher than the rest. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized they were not made of paper or flame. Tiny orbs hovered above the yard, faint as fireflies, swaying as though caught in a breeze that did not touch the ground. They pulsed softly in and out, matching the rhythm that had been vibrating inside his chest. The boy felt drawn to them immediately. He stood without thinking, his body moving before his mind could question. The girl rose as well, following her presence steady behind him. Together they walked toward the lights, their steps quiet over the grass. The guests barely noticed, too, caught in their own drifting conversations. But the older man's eyes tracked them with a flicker of interest that did not reach his lips. The closer they came, the more the boy felt the hymn growing louder. Not frightening, but insistent, like a heartbeat amplified in the silence. The lights swirled gently above them, and he realized they were not random. They were forming shapes, fleeting patterns that shifted before they could fully settle. For a moment, he saw something like a spiral, then a wave, then what seemed to be the outline of hands reaching toward one another before dissolving again. The boy tilted his head back, entranced, as the orbs danced above him. The girl spoke softly, her voice carrying the calm certainty it always did. They were listening, too. He looked at her, then back at the lights. Listening to what? To you, she said simply. To the way you've steadied the night. They only gather when they find someone who can hold the rhythm without breaking it. The boy's throat tightened. He didn't feel worthy of such attention, not from lights that seemed older than words. But I don't even know what I'm doing. Her gaze softened. You don't have to know, you only have to be open. The boy let the words settle inside him. He lifted his hands slowly, unsure if it was foolish. But when he did, one of the lights drifted lower, brushing against his fingertips with a warmth that was neither fire nor air. The hum inside him flared, filling him with a sense of belonging so profound that his knees nearly gave way. In that touch, he felt not only the night, but the echoes of countless nights before, each one held together by someone who had chosen to listen instead of turn away. Tears pricked at his eyes, though he did not fully understand why. The light lingered for a moment longer before rising again, weaving back into the pattern of its companions. The boy lowered his hand, his chest aching with both awe and fragility. From behind, the older man's voice carried across the grass, softer than usual, but edged with something deeper. Careful, kid. Those lights aren't just decoration. They're memory. They're every choice that's ever steadied a night like this one. They'll show you what you need, but they'll also take a piece of you if you're not strong enough to carry it. The boy turned to face him, the words heavy in his chest. Will they take it forever? The man shrugged, though his eyes betrayed a seriousness. His posture did not. Forever is just another word. What matters is what you do with what you have left. The boy glanced again at the girl, who nodded once, as though confirming the truth in the man's words. She did not seem afraid, and her calm steadied him more than anything else. The light shifted then, forming a slow, spiraling path that stretched outward from where they stood. The boy felt the pull of it deep in his chest, urging him forward. He hesitated, looking between the girl and the man. The girl's gaze told him she would walk with him if he chose, while the man's silence suggested he would not stop him, but neither would he guide him. The boy stepped forward. The grass seemed to soften beneath his feet, and the hum grew louder, filling not only his chest but his entire body. The lights hovered closer, lighting the way with their pulsing glow. The girl followed quietly, her presence as steady as the stars above. Together they walked until the yard felt endless, until the sound of the party was no more than a distant murmur. The lights above swirled, gathering tighter, forming a dome of soft radiance around them. The boy stopped at the center, his breath catching at the sight. The orbs pulsed in unison now, their glow matching the rhythm of his heart, as though they had become one vast, breathing being. For a moment, everything stilled. The boy closed his eyes, and in the silence he felt the weight of the world pressing, not against him, but through him, as if asking him to carry it. He thought of the girl, of the man, of the laughter that had threatened to tear the night apart. He thought of the way silence had steadied the walls, the way his breath had soothed the chaos. And then he understood, not fully, but enough, that his power was not in changing the night, but in holding it with gentleness until it could steady itself. When he opened his eyes again, the lights had drifted higher, their spiral breaking apart into scattered stars. The dome dissolved, leaving only the quiet expanse of the yard and the girl at his side. The hum within him softened once more, quieter now, but steady, like a promise whispered only to him. The boy exhaled, his shoulders sinking with the release. The girl touched his hand briefly, a gesture without words but filled with meaning. Together they turned back toward the house where the older man still lingered in the shadows, his grin faint but his eyes gleaming with something almost proud. The night had not broken. It had shifted, revealed, demanded, but it had also bent, and in its bending, the boy had discovered not just the fragility of reality, but his own quiet strength, the strength to hold without forcing, to listen without needing to control. He walked back across the grass, each step heavier now with the weight of what he carried, but steadier than before. The party still flickered on, though softer, and the lanterns above glowed with fragile grace. For the first time, the boy felt he was no longer just a guest in the night. He was part of it. And as he lay down once more, the stars overhead seemed closer still, as though they too were listening. The boy lingered on the grass even after the lights dissolved into the dark, his body heavy yet strangely light, as if some piece of himself had been left floating with them. The girl stayed close, her quiet presence anchoring him, while the older man leaned lazily against the doorframe of the house. His grin softened into something that looked almost reflective. The hum inside the boy had calmed into a low current, steady enough to feel like it would never leave him again. He thought of how close the night had come to breaking, and how silence, breath, and listening had steadied it. Yet he sensed that what had passed was not the end of the lesson, only its beginning. The older man finally stepped forward, crunching lightly over the grass, his eyes fixed on the boy in a way that carried more weight than his casual gait suggested. "You think you've understood it," he said softly, though his words carried an edge. "But nights like these don't end when you think they do. They only shift. They always ask more." The boy sat up slowly, his palms pressing against the ground as though he could draw steadiness from the soil. He wanted to say he was ready, that he could listen again, but his chest tightened with the memory of the lights brushing against his fingertips, how vast and infinite they had felt. He wasn't sure if anyone could truly be ready for that weight. The girl tilted her head toward the man. "He doesn't need to be told what he already feels," she said quietly, her voice like a thread of calm weaving through the space between them. The man's grin twitched, but he didn't argue. The boy rose to his feet, legs unsteady but determined. "What else will it ask?" The man studied him as though gauging whether he wanted the truth or the comfort of silence. "It will ask you to dance with it," he said at last. "Not to control, not to fix, but to move when it moves, to sway when it sways. If you can do that, you don't just survive the night, you become part of it." The boy frowned. "A dance?" The man chuckled, but his eyes remained serious. "You'll see." As if on cue, the music from the house swelled again, no longer jagged or warped, but deep and slow, resonant like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The guests, scattered across the yard, stirred as though drawn by some unseen current. They rose in pairs or alone, their bodies swaying to the rhythm that was not quite human, not quite song, but something in between. The boy felt the pulse within him answer, sinking almost against his will. The girl stepped forward, holding out her hand without a word. Her eyes were calm, but there was a glimmer of challenge there too, as if she were silently asking whether he would step into the rhythm or shy away. His hesitation lasted only a moment before he placed his hand in hers. As soon as their palms touched, the hum surged again, not painful but insistent, tugging at his chest, guiding his steps. They moved together onto the grass, the lanterns above swaying as though stirred by their motion. The boy had never been graceful, never known how to dance, but his body seemed to understand what his mind could not. He swayed, stumbled, then found the rhythm again, led not by the music, but by the steady pulse inside him, and the anchor of her hand in his. Around them, the guests moved too, their laughter softer now, their voices blending into the strange song. The air shimmered faintly, as if reality itself leaned closer to watch. Every step the boy took seemed to ripple outward, the ground trembling gently in response, the lanterns flickering brighter. He realized then that this was what the man had meant. This was the dance with the fragile world, the act of moving with it instead of against it. The girl's gaze held his steady and unwavering, keeping him from drifting into fear. Her stillness balanced his uncertainty, her quiet presence teaching him that the dance was not about perfection, but about willingness. With each turn, each step, the boy felt the weight of the night less as a burden and more as a partner leaning into him, trusting him to carry it with care. The older man watched from the shadows, his grin curling wider. Though there was no mockery in it this time, he raised his hand slightly, as if to steady the rhythm himself, but then lowered it, choosing to let the boy find his own way. The boy spun clumsily, his feet tangling, but the girl steadied him with a gentle tug. They laughed softly, the sound not loud but enough to ripple through the night like a bell's faint chime. The guests echoed it, their laughter blending into the rhythm, and for a moment the entire yard seemed to sway as one. The stars above shimmered brighter, closer, as though leaning in to join the dance. The boy felt his chest expand, with a mixture of awe and surrender. He had thought listening was enough, but now he understood. The night did not want silence alone. It wanted participation, movement, presence. It wanted to be held not only with stillness, but with joy, with trembling courage, with the soft willingness to be part of its fragile song. Time stretched, blurred, folded. He didn't know how long they danced, only that the hum never left, only softened, deepened, until it became indistinguishable from his own heartbeat. The girl's hand stayed firm in his, the anchor that kept him from losing himself entirely in the rhythm. Finally, when the music faded into a low echo, the guests stilled one by one, collapsing into the grass as though the weight of the dance had left them spent but content. The boy and the girl slowed too, their steps faltering into stillness. They stood together, breathless but calm, the night around them shimmering with a quiet satisfaction. The older man approached, clapping his hands once, the sound sharp in the softened air. "Not bad," he said, though his eyes betrayed something gentler than pride, something like relief. "You didn't break it. You didn't break yourself. That's more than most manage." The boy let out a shaky breath, his chest still pulsing with the rhythm. "It felt bigger than me." "Of course it did," the man replied, leaning close enough that his words sank deep. "'Cause it is. That's the point. You're never meant to master it, only to join it." The boy nodded slowly, his gaze lifting once more to the stars. They no longer felt distant. They felt like companions, silent but watchful, carrying the same rhythm that now lived inside his chest. He realized then that the dance was not just for tonight. It was a lesson for every moment yet to come, an invitation to move with the fragile world instead of against it. The girl's hand lingered in us a moment longer before slipping away, her eyes soft but resolute. The boy knew she would always be there, steady, even in silence. He sank back into the grass once more, exhausted but fuller than before, while the night wrapped around them like a gentle, breathing cloak. The hum within him steadied, no longer strange, no longer alien. It belonged to him now, and he to it. And somewhere in the stillness he felt the fragile world exhale, as though it too was grateful for the dance. The grass beneath him still held the warmth of footsteps and laughter, the echoes of the dance lingering in every blade. The boy lay still, staring up at the sky, where the stars seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched his own breath. The hum inside him had softened to a quiet current, steady enough to let him rest, yet alive enough to remind him that the night had not finished speaking. Around him, the guests were scattered like fallen constellations, their breathing slow, their bodies heavy with a kind of sacred exhaustion. Even in their stillness, it felt as though the night itself was waiting. The girl remained near, her knees drawn to her chest, her gaze fixed not on the sky but on the boy, as if measuring how much of the rhythm had truly taken root in him. Her presence was quiet but sharp, like a lantern shielded from the wind. She didn't speak, and he didn't ask, because words at that moment would have felt too clumsy, too small for what pressed gently at the edges of his chest. The older man, however, did not lie down. He lingered at the edge of the gathering, pacing slowly as though the weight of silence was heavier for him than for the others. His grin was still there, but it was subdued, stretched thinner than before. The boy noticed how his eyes darted, not to the stars, not to the ground, but toward the shadows beyond the light of the lanterns. Something in his restlessness unsettled the boy, tugging at the fragile calm he had just learned to hold. The boy sat up, the hum inside him responding to his unease. The girl noticed, her gaze shifting quickly toward the man, narrowing as if she too felt the disturbance. The man stopped pacing, finally turning back to them with a look that was half warning, half reluctant acceptance. "The dance holds the world steady," he said, his voice softer than before. "But there are things out there that don't sway with it, things that wait for silence to fall, hoping the rhythm will slip." The boy frowned, his chest tightening. "What kind of things?" The man's grin flickered wider for a heartbeat, but his eyes betrayed no humor. "Shadows that don't belong to the night, echoes that never had a voice. Call them what you want. They come when they think you've forgotten the steps." The girl's hand brushed lightly against the boy's arm, grounding him before fear could dig deeper. "Not every shadow is an enemy," she said softly, though her tone carried a caution that kept her words from being comfort alone. The boy wanted to believe her, but even as he listened, he noticed it. The faint stirring at the edge of the lantern light, shapes that shifted not like branches or wind, but with intention. The hum in his chest quickened, urging him to remain steady, to hold the rhythm close. He forced his breath to slow, remembering the dance, the stillness, the way silence itself had once held the world together. The guests, too, began to stir uneasily, their exhaustion interrupted by the strange tension threading through the air. They whispered softly, their voices uncertain, blending into the rustling of the trees. Some stood, but their movements were sluggish, as though the dance had taken too much from them. The boy realized then that the weight of the rhythm had not only bound him to it, but had left the others vulnerable. The older man clapped his hands once, sharp enough to cut through the whispers. "Don't scatter," he said, his tone suddenly commanding, almost fierce. "If you scatter, you break the circle, and if you break the circle, they'll pour in." The boy looked around, trying to see the circle he spoke of, but there was nothing visible, only the scattered guests, the grass, the lantern swaying faintly, yet he felt it, the invisible ring of rhythm that held them together, fragile but real. His chest tightened as he realized how close they were to losing it. The girl rose gracefully, her movements deliberate, her eyes fixed on the stirring shadows. She reached for the boy's hand again, her grip firmer this time. "Remember the dance," she whispered. "It's not finished. It never is." The boy stood with her, his body trembling but steadying under the hum. He felt the rhythm rise again, not as joy this time, but as a shield, a current that wanted to be carried. The guests turned their eyes toward them, some frightened, some hopeful, as though waiting for someone to remind them how to move. The music from the house swelled again, unbidden, its deep resonance echoing like the heartbeat of something ancient. The boy's feet moved instinctively, guided by the pulse within him. The girl followed, their steps in unison, and one by one the guests began to rise, swaying again, hesitant but willing. The older man did not join, but his grin stretched sharper, his eyes fixed on the shadows as though daring them to breach the rhythm. The boy realized then that this was not just a dance for the night's beauty, it was a defense, a way of holding the fragile world steady against what waited in the dark. Each step, each sway, sent ripples through the ground, the lanterns, the very air weaving an invisible barrier that kept the shadows at bay. He could feel the resistance, the way the dark pressed closer, seeking cracks, but the rhythm pushed back, expanding, holding firm. Sweat beaded on his forehead, not from exertion, but from the weight of knowing how much depended on their movement. He faltered once, his step breaking, and immediately the shadows surged closer, their shapes flickering sharper at the edge of the light. The girl squeezed his hand hard, steadying him, pulling him back into rhythm before the circle could weaken. The hum in his chest steadied once more, syncing with the music, and the shadows recoiled, writhing as though struck by something they couldn't touch. The guests grew stronger with each step, their movements surer, their laughter returning in soft, trembling waves. The boy felt the rhythm deepen again, no longer just inside him but woven through all of them, binding them together in a living shield. The fragile world had not broken. It had held. The older man finally stepped forward, his grin sharp but his voice low, almost reverent. "Now you see, the night doesn't only ask you to listen, it asks you to protect what you've heard." The boy's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his body trembling from the effort. He looked again toward the shadows, now shrinking, dissolving into the ordinary darkness of the trees. The danger had passed, but the weight of it lingered in his bones. He knew now that this was not a lesson he could leave behind. It was a responsibility, one that would follow him beyond this night, into every silence, every rhythm, every fragile moment the world asked him to hold. The girl released his hand slowly, though her eyes stayed locked on his. He saw in her gaze not relief, but expectation, as though this was only the first of many nights they would face together. The hum in his chest steadied again, calmer, deeper, no longer strange, but familiar. He exhaled slowly, lifting his eyes once more to the stars. They pulsed faintly, in rhythm with him, and he understood the fragile world was still breathing, still waiting, still asking, and he was no longer afraid to answer. The boy's breath was still uneven as the rhythm softened inside him, its weight settling like an ember in the quiet of his chest. Around him, the guests had begun to sink back into the grass, their movements weary but lighter, as if some invisible burden had been carried together and set gently down. Lanterns swayed above them, their glow pale now, no longer pulsing to the music, but steady like small moons suspended low over the earth. The night, once restless, had fallen back into its calm, but the boy could not mistake the difference. It was not the same calm as before. Something had shifted. The girl sat beside him again, her presence still steady, though her hand no longer clutched his. She looked at him quietly, her expression unreadable, and though she did not speak, the boy felt as though she was asking him a question he could not yet name. He wanted to answer, but the words remained locked somewhere deeper, where the rhythm still hummed against his ribs. The older man had not sat at all. He remained near the shadows, pacing the perimeter, his grin subdued now, as if satisfaction lingered in his bones, but was tempered by vigilance. When his eyes caught the boy's, there was approval there, sharp and unhidden, yet there was also expectation, like a door only half opened. The boy wondered if that was what the girl had seen in him as well, that what had just happened was not an end, but a beginning, one that demanded more than he had imagined. The boy lay back on the grass, trying to steady himself in the sky's wide embrace. He closed his eyes, but the rhythm did not let him drift into sleep. It kept him awake, whispering faintly, not in words but in sensation, like tides pulling at his breath. reminding him of what still lingered beyond the edges of safety. He opened his eyes again, searching the stars for comfort, but instead of comfort, he found recognition. Their faint pulsing was no longer a mystery. They were answering him, as though they had always known his rhythm, and were only waiting for him to know it too. The girl followed his gaze, her own eyes lifting to the stars. "They're listening now," she said softly, almost as if to herself. The boy turned to her, surprised by her certainty, but before he could ask, she continued, "Not everything in the sky is silent. Some things answer when you finally remember how to speak." Her words echoed strangely, as if the night itself carried them further, weaving them into the still air. The boy felt a shiver rise through him, not of fear, but of recognition. He thought of the shadows that had pressed in, and how fragile their defense had been. He wondered if the stars had helped hold them back, or if they had only watched, measuring whether he would stand or fall. The older man returned then, his footsteps heavy against the grass. He sat across from them, his grin returning, though his voice was calm. "You held it," he said. "That's more than most can say after their first night. The rhythm didn't eat you alive, and it didn't slip from your hands." The boy blinked at him, unsure how to respond. "It didn't feel like I was holding anything," he admitted quietly. "It felt like it was holding me." The man laughed softly, shaking his head. "And that's the secret. You don't hold the rhythm. It holds you, but it only stays if you learn to carry it when the silence comes back." His eyes gleamed, catching the lantern light, and silence always comes back. The boy glanced around, realizing that silence had already returned. The music from the house was gone. The air was still. Even the guests seemed to breathe in unison, as though unwilling to disturb what had been restored. For the first time that night, the quiet did not feel like peace. It felt like waiting. The girl leaned closer, her voice a thread of sound just for him. "The shadows won't forget. They'll come again, when the circle is weaker, when you are alone. That's why you must keep moving, even when no one is watching." The boy's chest tightened at her words, but he did not argue. Deep inside, he already knew she was right. The rhythm was not something he could leave behind on the grass of one night. It was something that would follow him into every silence, demanding presence, balance, and movement. He thought of how heavy that sounded, yet also how strangely comforting. He would never truly be alone now. The hum would remain, even in the deepest quiet. The older man leaned back on his elbows, his grin widening again. "Don't mistake this for a burden. The rhythm is a gift, though it will never feel light. Carry it wrong, and it will wear you down. Carry it right, and it will make you more than you've ever been." The boy tilted his head. "More of what?" The man didn't answer directly. He only shrugged, his eyes flicking back toward the dark where the shadows had vanished. "More of whatever the world needs you to be when it breaks again." The boy felt his throat tighten. He wanted to ask what that meant, to demand clarity, but the girl's hand brushed his arm again, a quiet signal to let the silence answer instead. He closed his mouth, letting the question dissolve into the hum inside him. Time stretched strangely after that. The guests drifted into deeper sleep, some curling into the grass, some leaning against one another. The lanterns grew dimmer, their glow sinking closer to the color of ash than fire. The boy felt the edges of weariness creep into him at last, but just as he began to surrender to it, he noticed something. His dreams had already begun to bloom, even before his eyes had closed. Shapes of light, soft and wavering, traced themselves across the sky, mingling with the stars, as though the rhythm was weaving his thoughts outward instead of pulling them inward. He blinked, unsure if he was still awake. The girl was watching too, her expression calm, as though she had expected this. The older man's grin faded into something softer, his gaze distant. The boy realized then that what he saw was not his dream alone. The rhythm was painting itself into the world for all of them to witness. The light shapes swayed gently like dancers moving far above the earth, their forms not solid but made of shifting threads. They pulsed faintly, in rhythm with his chest, until the boy wondered if he was imagining the connection or if the stars were still answering him, shaping his breath into visions. The girl whispered, "You're beginning to see." The boy swallowed, his body trembling again. "See what?" She smiled faintly, almost sorrowfully. "That the rhythm doesn't just belong to you. It belongs to everything, and everything is asking you to remember it." Her words settled into him like seeds in dark soil, their meaning not fully clear, but heavy enough to change something in him. The boy lay back again, his eyes wide open, staring at the dancing lights above. He didn't know if they would remain when he closed his eyes, but he knew now that even in dreams, the rhythm would not leave him. It would hum, it would move, and it would wait until he learned to answer more fully. The hum inside him pulsed once more, not as a command but as a reminder. And he breathed with it, steady, quiet, letting it carry him into the softer edges of night. The boy drifted in the grass, his eyes open but blurred, as though he were balanced between waking and dream. The shapes of light above him had not faded. They swayed gently in the sky like lanterns tethered to invisible strings, bending with the rhythm that pulsed still in his chest. He was no longer certain where his thoughts ended and where the world began. Each breath seemed to ripple outward, brushing the air, touching the stars, stirring the silence into something alive. It was not imagination, not anymore. The rhythm was real, and it was speaking. The girl remained close, her posture upright, as if she feared that if she lay down, she would miss what unfolded. Her eyes reflected the light shapes, catching their shifting hues like mirrors of sky water. When she looked at him, there was no surprise in her face, only quiet affirmation, as though she had seen others pass this threshold before. But for the boy, the wonder was almost too much to contain. His chest ached with it, his skin prickling as if his body had become too small for what he now carried. The older man, unlike them, did not gaze upward. He kept his attention low toward the earth, as if the sky's unveiling was of less importance than the roots beneath his feet. His grin had less sharpness now, softened by thought, though his hands fidgeted restlessly in the grass. "Careful," he muttered, not quite to them, not quite to himself. "The sky is generous, but generosity always comes with a cost." The boy turned to him, struggling to understand. What kind of cost? The man's grin flickered again, but his eyes stayed shadowed. Every answer pulls another question closer. You don't get to keep the gift without carrying the weight that comes with it. The boy looked back up, his chest tightening. The lights above him shifted subtly, as if listening, their movements no longer just sways, but patterns, almost forming paths across the stars. He felt an ache deep in his ribs, a tug like longing, as though the rhythm was inviting him upward to step into the vastness and follow where those paths led. For a moment he wanted to rise, to leave the grass behind, to let his body dissolve into the sky's quiet pull. But the girl's hand brushed his again, grounding him with a pressure that reminded him he was not made only of light. Her voice was steady, though softer than before. "Not yet. If you go before you're ready, you'll lose more than you find." Her words cut through the longing, settling him back into the earth. He inhaled, the air cool and sharp, and exhaled slowly, willing the ache to quiet. The lights above dimmed slightly, as if retreating, waiting for another time. Silence stretched again, but it was no longer the fragile silence of danger. It was the deep pause of something watching, something measuring, as though the world itself had leaned closer, deciding how much of itself it should reveal. The boy felt the hum shift within him, steady but quieter, a heartbeat returning to rest after being pushed to its edge. He wondered if this was what the older man had meant, that the gift would not leave him, but neither would the weight. The guests around them stirred faintly in their sleep, some murmuring, some sighing, as if their dreams had caught whispers of what had unfolded above. The boy realized then that the rhythm had touched them all. Not just him, though in gentler, less overwhelming ways. They would not remember in the morning. Not clearly, but something would remain in them. A softness, a thread that tied them to this night forever. The older man finally shifted his gaze from the ground, his grin curling back into place. "The stars won't ask you again tonight," he said, "but they will, again and again. Each time, a little louder. Each time, a little harder to ignore." The boy swallowed, his throat dry. "And if I ignore them," the man chuckled, low and brief, "then the shadows will answer in their place, and you've already seen how they dance." The boy shivered, remembering the way the darkness had pressed against the circle, eager to pour in. He realized then that choosing silence was not safety. It was surrender. The girl leaned closer, her hair brushing his shoulder as she spoke. "You don't have to decide tonight. It's enough that you've heard. That's all the rhythm asks of you for now." Her words loosened the tightness in his chest. He let himself breathe deeper, the cool air filling him with a steadiness he hadn't known he needed. He lay back again, eyes half closed, watching the stars dim until they became ordinary once more. Ordinary, but not the same. He could never see them as only distant lights again. They were listening. They were waiting. Time folded gently after that. The guests slept soundly. The grass swayed with a breeze that returned as though it had been waiting for permission. The lanterns flickered faintly, their glow thinning as the oil burned low. The night felt older, quieter, but not empty. It carried a fullness that pressed softly against the skin, like the weight of a blanket after long weariness. The boy closed his eyes, not to escape the visions, but to let them rest. Sleep hovered near, fragile but insistent. Yet, even as he drifted toward it, he felt the rhythm continue beneath his breath. Not fading, not leaving. It curled into his dreams. A companion, a reminder, a promise. When he finally surrendered, the world did not go dark. Instead, he dreamed of the same lights he had seen in the sky, only now they were closer, surrounding him, weaving patterns that shifted and folded like rivers of stars. He walked among them without fear, his steps guided by the hum in his chest. Every movement he made sent ripples through the light, as though the dream itself was listening. The girl was there too, though she did not walk beside him. She moved through the lights, like water through reeds, her eyes always fixed on him, her expression calm, steady, a lantern of presence. The older man appeared further away, his grin faint, watching but not interfering, as though the dream belonged to the boy alone. The boy reached out, his fingers brushing one of the threads of light. It vibrated gently under his touch, resonating with the hum in his chest, and the sound it made was not music, but memory. He saw flashes, faces he had known, places he had walked, moments of laughter and silence, all woven into the thread, as if the rhythm had been keeping record all along. He pulled his hand back, trembling, overwhelmed by how much of himself was already written into the rhythm without his knowing. He turned to the girl, searching for understanding. She only nodded, her voice carrying through the dream without breaking the silence. It remembers everything, not just yours, but all of it. Every step, every pause, every echo. Nothing is ever truly lost. The boy's chest ached with the weight of it, with the enormity of belonging to something so vast. He realized then that this was the cost the older man had spoken of. Not danger, not punishment, but the inescapable truth that once you had heard the rhythm, you could no longer pretend to be separate from it. You carried it, and it carried you, and there was no turning away. He let the hum steady him again, breathing with it, walking deeper into the dream of light, and for the first time, he did not resist the weight. He welcomed it, even as it pressed into his bones. The night deepened around them, and the silence was no longer a comfort, but a pressing weight that made every breath feel heavier. Zara could still hear the echo of the cryptic words the hooded figure had whispered, and though no one else had spoken of it, she knew it lingered in all their minds. Yashin's eyes were the most restless of them all, darting toward the shadows as if waiting for something to emerge. The forest seemed to lean closer, the trees bending in unnatural ways, their branches curving like skeletal arms reaching for the travelers who dared tread their path. The air grew colder, and every flicker of the fire was swallowed faster than it should have been, as if the darkness itself was hungry. Armain sat quietly sharpening his blade, though Zara could tell his mind was not on the steel. His movements were steady, but his jaw tightened with each scrape, a rhythm of unease. The others tried to rest, but it was clear that sleep had become an enemy rather than a relief. Whenever one of them closed their eyes, they would jolt awake moments later, drenched in sweat, as though chased out of their dreams by unseen hands. Zara did not attempt to sleep. Her mind was alive with questions. Why were they being drawn deeper into this forest, and what exactly waited for them at the heart of it? As the fire dimmed, Zara noticed something strange. A faint glow pulsed between the trees, not like firelight nor the reflection of the moon, but something steady, deliberate, almost breathing. She nudged Isan, pointing toward the shifting light. At first he dismissed it as her imagination, but when the glow pulsed again, stronger this time, he froze. Our man looked up, his blade clattering softly against the stone as he realized what they were all seeing. No one spoke, but they all knew the forest was no longer watching passively. It was calling them. Compelled by an unspoken pull, they rose together, each step slow, as though the ground itself resisted their movement. The glow seemed to retreat deeper into the forest with every pace they took, like a phantom leading them forward, daring them to follow. The silence broke with a low hum that trembled through the air, vibrating in their bones, resonating with the very core of their beings. Zara felt her heartbeat align with it, steady yet unnerving, as though the forest was trying to sync them with its own rhythm. They reached a clearing that looked untouched by time. In the center stood a stone structure, half buried under roots and moss, carved with symbols none of them recognized. The glow came from within, seeping out through cracks in the stone, too alive to be merely light. Armand approached first, his blade raised, but the moment he laid a hand on the cold surface, the ground shuddered beneath them. The roots around the stone shifted like serpents, tightening their grip, and the symbols lit up one by one, blazing as if awakened after centuries of slumber. Yashin staggered back, clutching his head as whispers filled the clearing, voices not carried by air, but crawling straight into their minds. Zara heard her name among them, spoken in tones both reverent and threatening, as if she were the answer and the question all at once. She fell to her knees, her chest tightening, unable to escape the sound. It wasn't just noise, it was memory, warning, and prophecy entangled together. She glimpsed flashes of fire, shadows clashing, and a great fracture tearing through the earth, and always the feeling that something had been waiting, patient, and watching for this very moment. The light burst outward suddenly, engulfing the clearing in brilliance so sharp it forced their eyes shut. When Zara opened hers again, the world had changed. The clearing was no longer empty, but filled with figures cloaked in translucent forms, as if they were caught between the living and the dead. They moved soundlessly, their faces indistinct, but their eyes, if they could be called eyes, fixed on Zara with unbearable intensity. Armin swung his blade instinctively, but it passed through them, leaving no trace. Aishin's voice trembled as he whispered, "They're not here to harm us. They're waiting." Zara forced herself to stand, her knees weak but her resolve hardening. The figures parted, clearing a path toward the heart of the structure. At its center lay an altar, simple yet commanding, etched with the same burning symbols. The glow pulsed stronger there, as if it had been breathing all this time, waiting for her to arrive. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as it hovered over the altar, and for a moment the whispers hushed. The air stilled, and even the forest seemed to hold its breath. When her palm touched the cold stone, a surge of energy shot through her body, searing yet strangely familiar, as though it recognized her. Visions poured into her mind, not of what had been, but of what could be. A choice laid bare before her. She saw two paths, one drenched in ruin, where cities burned under skies torn open by darkness, and another fragile yet radiant, where balance was restored, but at a cost so heavy it threatened to shatter her. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Why me?" The answer was not words, but a flood of emotion, ancient and overwhelming, pressing into her chest like the weight of the world itself. The figures bowed their heads in unison, and the glow dimmed to a steady thrum, no longer urging, but waiting. Zara staggered back, her body trembling, her mind raw with the weight of what she had glimpsed. Ermin caught her arm, steadying her, though his own hands shook. Isham's voice was firm now, though his face betrayed his fear. "Whatever this is, it has chosen you, and that means the path ahead is no longer ours to refuse." The clearing fell silent again, but it was no longer the silence of peace. It was the silence before a storm, the hush of something vast and dangerous gathering strength beyond sight. Zara looked at her companions, then at the endless forest that seemed to tighten around them, and though her heart screamed with uncertainty, she knew they had stepped into a current far greater than themselves. There was no turning back. The forest had marked them, and the path forward would demand everything they were willing and unwilling to give. The forest no longer felt like a place of wandering. It had become a living presence that pressed against them from all sides, as though the air itself knew their names. Zara's chest still carried the echo of the altar's surge, her pulse racing in uneven rhythms that refused to calm. Her companions stayed close, though even in their nearness, she felt the growing distance between them. Each of them weighed down by the realization that they were no longer just travelers. They've been chosen, though none of them yet understood by what or why. The silence after the vision was suffocating, but they dared not linger in the clearing. The spectral figures had faded, yet their watchful presence clung to the air like smoke after fire. Eshin urged them onward, his voice steady though his eyes betrayed unease. "If we stay here, the forest will devour us whole. Whatever called us has already set the path. We either walk it, or it consumes us." Ormone gave a short nod, gripping his blade tighter. Though Zara noticed his knuckles were white against the hilt, for once he had no sharp words. Only the quiet acceptance of a man bracing for what he could not fight with steel. They followed a narrow path that seemed to carve itself ahead of them as they walked. The roots shifted subtly, pulling back, guiding them deeper into the unknown. The glow they had chased before had disappeared, replaced by a faint hum that pulsed beneath the ground. Each step vibrated through their bones, aligning with Zara's heart in a way that unsettled her, like the forest was weaving her very existence into its rhythm. She tried to steady her breathing, but her thoughts spiraled back to the visions, the ruin, the fire, the unbearable weight of choice. The future was no longer abstract. It was tethered to her, and every step forward was a step toward it. As the hours stretched on, the forest shifted around them. The trees grew taller, their trunks impossibly wide, bark blackened and etched with faint scars of fire long extinguished. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of earth and ash. Shadows twisted unnaturally, bending away from the faint light of their torches as though recoiling from flame. Zara could feel unseen eyes trailing them, not hostile but patient, like predators who had no need to rush their hunt. Armin finally broke the silence. Whatever that altar was, it wanted you. That much is clear. His voice carried no accusation, but the weight of truth in it made Zara flinch. She wanted to deny it, to push the burden away. But the memory of the glowing figures bowing before her silenced her tongue. Ishan stepped in quickly, his tone firm but gentle. If she has been chosen, then it is not hers alone to carry. We all share in it. The forest does not call one without binding the others. His words steadied them for a moment. But even as he spoke, Zara sensed the fracture between hope and fear widening in each of their hearts. The hymn beneath their feet grew louder until it was no longer a vibration, but a sound that pressed against their ears. Low and constant, they emerged into another clearing larger than the first. Its ground cracked and uneven, as though something immense had once erupted from below. At its center lay a chasm, wide and bottomless, a dark mouth gaping into the earth. From within, the hum resonated, pulsing upward, each beat a reminder of the ancient power buried there. The edges of the chasm glowed faintly, etched with the same symbols from the altar, as though the two were connected. Zara felt her body drawn toward it, her feet carrying her closer even as fear coiled in her chest. She peered into the darkness, but it revealed nothing. No bottom, no end. Only the sense of depth that pulled her thoughts downward, threatening to swallow her mind as easily as it could her body. A cold wind rose from the abyss, carrying whispers that brushed against her ears. She could not make out words, only tones, rising and falling like half-formed voices speaking in unison. Ishan pulled her back sharply, breaking the trance. Don't listen. That chasm is not meant for eyes or ears. It feeds on both. His warning came too late for Armin, who had already stepped close. His blade lowered, his gaze locked on the shifting dark, his breathing quickened, his face pale in the torchlight. Zara grabbed his arm, snapping him out of it, and he recoiled violently as though waking from a nightmare. He looked at her with wide eyes, shaken in a way she had never seen before. It knew me, he whispered hoarsely. It spoke my name. The hymn grew louder and the ground trembled beneath them. From the edges of the chasm, shapes began to emerge. Shadows given form, not fully flesh, not fully spirit, but something caught between. They rose slowly, their movements deliberate, their presence suffocating. Their forms shifted constantly, as though refusing to settle into a single shape, but their faces, if they could be called faces, turned toward Zara with the same unbearable intensity as the figures in the first clearing. Warman raised his blade, but Ishan stopped him, his voice low. Steel cannot touch what is bound to the chasm. To fight them is to feed them. Zara stepped forward, her fear sharp but controlled, her voice trembling as she spoke. What do you want from me? The shadows paused, their forms flickering, and the whispers from the abyss grew clearer, threading into words that chilled her blood. The fracture has begun. The choice must be made. The ground shuddered violently, splitting at the edges as stones crumbled into the abyss. The shadows encircled them, not attacking but closing in, pressing them toward the edge. Zara's vision blurred with flashes again. Cities torn apart, fire consuming the sky, rivers boiling, people crying out as the earth split beneath them. But layered over the ruin was another vision, light breaking through, balance restored, but always at the price of sacrifice. The shadows drew closer, their whispers merging into a single voice that thundered in her skull. Will you bear it? Zara's knees weakened, and she fell, clutching her head as the visions tore through her. She felt Armin's hand on her shoulder, Ishan's voice shouting her name, but their presence was distant compared to the storm raging inside her. She wanted to refuse, to cast the weight aside, but deep down she knew refusal was not an option. The forest had already marked her, the altar had bound her, and the chasm now demanded her answer. With trembling hands, she pressed her palms against the ground, steadying herself. She forced her voice out, fragile but unyielding. I will bear it. The shadows froze, the hum silenced, the earth stilled. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but silence. Then the abyss roared, a sound so immense it shook the air itself, and light burst upward, blinding and consuming. Zara was lifted from the ground, her body suspended, her mind overwhelmed as the chasm poured its energy into her. It was fire and ice, agony and clarity, breaking her apart and remaking her all at once. When the light receded, she collapsed into Armin's arms, her body trembling but alive. The chasm was no longer glowing. It lay dormant, silent, as though sealed. The shadows had vanished, leaving only the cracked earth and the echo of the roar lingering in their bones. As Shan crouched beside her, his expression a mixture of awe and fear. It has bound itself to you, he said softly. The choice is no longer distant. It is coming. Zara struggled to her feet, her body weak but her gaze fierce. She looked at the abyss, then at her companions, and though fear still gnawed at her, a strange resolve steadied her voice. Then we will face it, whatever it demands. The forest seemed to exhale around them, the trees swaying in a slow, deliberate rhythm, as though acknowledging her vow. But deep in her chest, the surge of the altar and the chasm remained, a reminder that the storm ahead was no longer just approaching. It was already here, waiting to break. The morning arrived, not with the gentle touch of sunlight, but with a trembling hush that seemed to roll through the forest like a slow wave. Mist lingered low over the cracked ground, curling around the roots and stones, softening edges yet making each step uncertain. Zara's muscles ached from the night's ordeal, but the pulse in her chest, the residue of the chasm's surge, kept her alert. She moved deliberately, each step measured, feeling the subtle vibrations beneath her feet as though the forest itself remembered the events of yesterday. She was no longer just part of the world. She had become a vessel for it, carrying the rhythm, the weight, and the whispering energy forward with her. Amir walked beside her, silent but watchful, his blade sheathed now, though his eyes never strayed from the shifting shadows at the edge of the mist. Ashen led the way cautiously, occasionally pausing to listen, his expression tense, the unease of the night still clinging to him. The forest seemed almost alive in a new way, not the suffocating, pressing life of the previous night, but a watchful, quiet intelligence, like an old being observing a child. It had raised too quickly. Every step they took stirred faint echoes of the surge that had passed through Zara. A reminder that the chasm's energy was not contained, that it had left a lingering pulse in the soil, in the air, and now in them. They reached a part of the forest that had been hidden before, a grove of ancient trees whose trunks were twisted into spirals, bark etched with symbols that glimmered faintly under the mist. The hum beneath their feet deepened, resonating with Zara's pulse until she felt as though her own heartbeat were the rhythm of the grove itself. A sense of inevitability pressed upon her. This was not a place stumbled upon, but one she had been drawn to as though by invisible strings since the moment she touched the altar. Ishan broke the silence, his voice low but urgent. This place, it's older than the forest we came through. I can feel the weight of it. The chasm's power, it must have originated here. His eyes swept the grove, resting on a stone altar smaller than the one before, yet pulsing faintly with the same inner glow. It's like a seed, he whispered, and the chasm was its bloom. Zara stepped closer, her hand brushing the carved symbols. Energy surged again, gentler than before, but no less alive. She saw glimpses, memories not her own, moments frozen in the stone. A figure standing before the altar centuries ago, their face obscured, hands raised as if offering something to the void. Storms ravaging the land, voices crying out across vast spaces. Each vision was fleeting, yet together they painted a tapestry of continuity, as if she were witnessing the eternal dialogue between the forest, the chasm, and those who had come before her. Armin's hand rested on her shoulder, grounding her. We are part of that dialogue now, he said quietly. Whatever this is asking, it is not only for you, Zara. It has chosen all of us. We walk forward together, because there is no turning back. The hum of the forest intensified, vibrating in their chests and limbs, until Zara felt her body lifted slightly, suspended between earth and mist. The pulse of the altar intertwined with the pulse in her own veins, and a strange clarity bloomed in her mind. She understood, not in words, but in the quiet recognition of patterns, the way the energy flowed, the way each choice rippled across the land, the delicate balance of destruction and restoration that had been waiting for someone to bear it. A faint wind stirred the mist, carrying with it the scent of smoke and rain, and with it came whispers, soft, unintelligible at first, but then forming into words that brushed against her mind. You have carried the weight, you have seen. The path is yours, but do not falter. The grove seemed to lean closer, shadows of branches bending like hands offering guidance. The light from the altar shifted, forming patterns in the mist, guiding their path deeper into the forest to places unseen and unimagined. Each step forward carried more certainty than the last, but also a heavier burden. Zara realized that the chasm's gift was not a power to wield at will. It was a responsibility, a rhythm that demanded attention, understanding, and courage. Hours passed, though time in the grove felt fluid, measured not in minutes but in shifts of light and pulse of energy. They reached another clearing where a circle of standing stones had been arranged long ago. Each stone bore the same symbols as the altar and the chasm, connecting past, present, and future in a pattern that hummed beneath their feet. The hum grew louder here, wrapping around them like a tide, and Zara felt the pull of the rhythm stronger than ever, as though urging her to step into the center, to offer herself fully to what had chosen her. Ishan's voice was a tether to reality. Whatever happens next, he said, we face it together. Remember that. Armin nodded silently, his eyes fixed on the central stone, the apex of the circle. Zara took a deep breath, feeling the pulse beneath her feet align with the pulse in her chest, synchronizing her being with the very energy that had shaped the forest and the chasm. She stepped forward, into the center, and let herself be enveloped by the rhythm, the mist, and the ancient intelligence that had been waiting through centuries for someone to answer. The moment she fully accepted, the hums surged into a crescendo, not violent but overwhelming, washing over them in waves of sensation and understanding. Visions flooded her mind again, more detailed this time, the potential futures unfolding before her, the responsibilities she would carry, the sacrifices she would need to make. Yet within the chaos, she also felt the possibility of harmony, of balance restored, of the forest and the chasm, and all who came after existing in a fragile but radiant equilibrium. When the pulse finally softened, Zara opened her eyes, grounded again, yet transformed. She knew that the path ahead would test every part of her being, and that fear would always be close, whispering in the shadows. But she also knew she was not alone. The forest, the chasm, the companions beside her, they were all bound to this journey now, woven together by choice, trust, and the rhythm that would guide them through what was to come. She turned to Armin and Asian, the weight in her chest still present but tempered by resolve. The forest has shown us the next step, she said softly, her voice steady despite exhaustion. We cannot run, we cannot hide, whatever awaits, we meet it. And in the hush that followed, the forest seemed to breathe with them, the mist curling like a gentle exhale, the standing stones pulsing faintly, and the rhythm ancient, patient, and unyielding flowing through every root, every leaf, and every heartbeat that would carry them forward. The forest had begun to soften around them, the mist thinning into delicate ribbons of morning light that threaded through the twisted branches. The pulse that had gripped Zara's chest for so long now beat with a gentler rhythm, settling into something steady and patient, like a quiet river that had weathered a storm. Her limbs were heavy with fatigue, but the weight felt different now, less of fear, more of presence. She understood that the night, the chasm, the visions, and the shadows had been lessons, each moment folding into the next, shaping her without hurry or judgment. Armin walked beside her with careful steps, scanning the ground yet moving with a newfound calm. The tension in his shoulders had eased slightly, though his eyes remained sharp, reflective of the trials they had endured together. Ishin led the way, his figure tall and deliberate, as if he had absorbed some of the forest's ancient patience. Even the air felt different, vibrating faintly but without threat, carrying the scent of damp leaves and quiet promise. The pulse beneath their feet was almost imperceptible now, yet Zara felt its hum within her bones, a reminder that the forest's intelligence still watched, still held them accountable to the rhythm they had embraced. They entered a clearing unlike any they had seen before, broad and circular, surrounded by trees that arched inward like cathedral vaults. Sunlight dappled the ground, painting the soil in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. In the center of the clearing lay a pool of water so still it reflected the canopy above with crystal clarity. The standing stones from the previous grove seemed to echo here too, faint symbols carved into the bark of the surrounding trees, aligning with the pool as if the entire grove had been constructed to mirror the chasm and the altar. Zara approached the water, kneeling at its edge. Her reflection was blurred at first, a ripple of uncertainty, but then it sharpened, revealing not only her features but the faint glow of the rhythm within her. She reached out a hand, touching the surface, and the water responded, folding inwards like breath held too long. She glimpsed moments she could barely comprehend, her companion's fears and hopes, the forest's memory of those who had passed before, and faintly, the futures she might yet shape. The water was not just a reflection but a mirror of possibility, and the pulse within it matched the rhythm that had become a part of her. Armin crouched beside her, his voice softer than it had been in hours. "It's showing us what we carry, what we've earned," he said. "Not just power or choice, but responsibility. The forest, the chasm, they've bound themselves to us. Yes, but they also trust us to bear it well." His eyes met hers, steady and unwavering, and Zara felt a strange warmth bloom within her chest, a quiet affirmation that they were not alone in the weight they bore. As Sean knelt on the opposite side of the pool, tracing his fingers through the water without disturbing it. "Everything is connected," he murmured. "Past, present, future, all of it flows through us now. Every step we take will echo farther than we know." His tone was reverent, almost fearful, yet there was a calmness in it that steadied the group. The forest has given us guidance, but not answers. It's our choice how to honor that trust. Zara lingered at the water's edge, letting the rhythm within her settle fully. She realized that the pulse she carried was not merely a reflection of what had happened, but a living current that would shape every decision from this moment onward. She could feel the chasm's echo in her bones, the altar's gift in her pulse, and the forest's patient observation surrounding them like an invisible embrace. She understood, at last, that fear had never been the forest's lesson. It had been presence, an insistence that she move deliberately, accept responsibility, and carry the weight of what had been given with quiet courage. Time seemed to fold around them in the clearing. The mist that had lingered dissolved fully into sunlight, casting long shadows across the pool and the grove. The trees' twisted trunks glimmered faintly in the morning, the symbols etched into their bark softening into subtle patterns of light. Every movement, every breath carried a sense of stillness and inevitability, as though the forest itself had exhaled in relief. Zara finally stood, brushing the damp soil from her hands. She looked at her companions and allowed herself a small, unburdened smile. "We've endured the storm," she said quietly, "and now we must walk forward, not because the path is easy, but because it is ours to tread." Armin nodded, the hint of a grin curving his lips, no longer tense, but calm and thoughtful. "And whatever comes," he said, "we face it together. The forest has made that clear." Innocent traced a line in the dirt, watching it ripple like a small reflection of the rhythm that had guided them. "We will remember this," he said, voice soft but assured. "The pulse we carry, it will guide not only our steps, but those who follow. We are no longer alone, nor are we unanchored." The sun rose higher, bathing the clearing in warm light that seemed to ripple through the grove. The water's surface shimmered, capturing the glow and reflecting it back into the surrounding trees, creating a gentle halo of brilliance. For the first time, Zara felt the full weight of acceptance settle in her chest, not as burden but as quiet responsibility, interwoven with gratitude and calm understanding. She realized that the forest, the chasm, and the rhythm were not forces to resist or conquer. They were guides, and she, along with Arman and Ishan, were entrusted to carry their legacy with humility, courage, and presence. As they prepared to leave the clearing, the pulse beneath their feet quieted to a subtle hum, no longer insistent but steady, like the deep undercurrent of a river that carries life unseen. Zara took a last look at the pool, at the reflections of herself and her companions, and whispered into the soft morning air, "We will honor it." The forest, patient and eternal, responded with a gentle rustling of leaves as if acknowledging her vow. The mist lifted fully, revealing the path ahead, dappled with sunlight and the promise of journeys yet to be undertaken. Each step forward was lighter, steadier, infused with the rhythm they had claimed, not a burden to fear, but a presence to guide, an echo of what had been endured and what would be honored. And so they walked, the forest stretching and breathing around them, their shadows merging with the light and mist, carrying the pulse of the chasm, the altar, and the grove into the world beyond, forever transformed by what they had seen, felt, and accepted. The forest had shifted again, though not violently, not with the tremors or the humming that had defined their previous trials. Instead, it breathed around them in soft, measured movements, the trees swaying gently as though sharing a secret with the morning light. The mist had fully lifted now, leaving behind a haze of warmth and quiet luminescence that settled over the undergrowth like a blessing. Zara walked slowly, each step deliberate, feeling the pulse within her chest echo in harmony with the forest's quiet rhythm. She realized as she moved that the journey had changed them all, not just the moments of fear, but the endurance of uncertainty, the choice to face the unknown with courage, and the acceptance of what had been given. Arman walked beside her, his blade slung across his back, no longer a tool of defense, but a reminder of the paths they had survived. The tension in his shoulders had dissolved completely, replaced by a calm vigilance that reflected the lessons carved into their journey. Isharan's presence ahead was steady and guiding, yet even he moved with a new awareness, attuned not only to the forest, but to the rhythms that connected them all. There was a sense of quiet intimacy in their steps, the kind of unspoken bond forged in trials that reached beyond words. They were no longer just companions, they were conduits of something far greater than themselves. They reached a plateau overlooking a valley that stretched endlessly below, dappled in golden light from the descending sun. The chasm they had encountered now felt distant, softened in memory by the rhythm Zara carried in her veins. She gazed down at the valley, the rivers threading through the landscape like veins, the forests unfolding like a tapestry, and the mountains standing solemn in the distance. Every element felt alive, aware, waiting, as though the world itself recognized the changes within them. The pulse in her chest had slowed, becoming a subtle, almost imperceptible thrum that matched the wind rustling across the plateau. Zara knelt beside a cluster of stones at the plateau's edge, tracing the faint carvings that mirrored those they had seen in the altar and the standing stones. Her fingers tingled at the touch, not with fear but with recognition, like brushing the memory of something she had always known but never named. Armin crouched beside her, his hand brushing hers gently. You've carried it well, he said softly. The forest, the chasm, they've entrusted you, and you've accepted. That's no small thing. Ishan stepped closer, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. We all have carried it, he said. Not just you. The rhythm has bound us together, made us aware of what it means to bear responsibility, to honor the unseen currents that shape our world. And now, here, it is no longer about fear, but about understanding. Zara exhaled, the weight of months, or had it been years, in the pulse of the forest, lifting slightly from her shoulders. She felt a quiet smile curve her lips, the first real moment of ease since the altar's surge. We've been given so much, she said. Not power, not control, but understanding. And I think that's the gift. To see, to feel, and to carry it forward with care. They lingered on the plateau as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the valley like tendrils of memory. The air was filled with the soft hum of life, the fluttering of leaves, the distant call of birds returning home, the wind threading through the grasses, and Zara felt for the first time a sense of completion that was not an ending, but a soft continuation. They had faced what had been asked of them, and though the challenges ahead were not gone, the weight of them was now steady, understood, and shared. The mist returned briefly as twilight approached, curling around their feet, but it no longer carried the menace of before. It was gentle, almost comforting, wrapping them in a soft embrace, as though the forest itself acknowledged their endurance and offered a quiet benediction. Zura looked at Armin and Ashen, their faces etched with the fatigue of survival yet softened by recognition and relief. They were changed, yes, but not broken. Each step forward would carry the lessons they had learned. The pulse, the rhythm, the weight of responsibility into the world beyond this forest, beyond the chasm, beyond the altar. Zara took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, the pulse in her chest syncing with the wind, the valley, the rhythm of the unseen currents around them. We will remember this, she said quietly. Every choice, every moment, and we will walk forward, carrying it all with care. Ishan nodded, a quiet smile touching his lips. Yes, he said. And perhaps by carrying it well, we honor not only what has been given to us, but what those before us have carried too. The pulse doesn't end. It continues, in all who listen. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber. Shadows lengthened and softened, the air cooling, and the forest exhaled in unison, a gentle sigh that wrapped around the travelers like a lullaby. Zara felt the pulse within her become part of the night itself, steady and reassuring, a rhythm that promised continuity, presence, and quiet guidance. She turned to her companions and with a soft voice said, "Thank you for walking this path with me, for seeing, for carrying, for staying. We've endured, and now we rest in what we've become." Armin offered a small nod, Eshan a gentle smile, and together they watched the twilight fold into night, feeling the pulse of the forest, the echo of the chasm, and the rhythm of their journey intertwine into a quiet, enduring harmony. And somewhere beneath the stars, Zara felt the last whispers of the forest's ancient voice settle into her soul. She breathed deeply, the pulse slowing into a gentle hum, and allowed herself to lean against the stones, resting in the peace they had earned, the journey's lessons etched forever in their beings.
Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's gonna be okay, man.